By Viet, stop him. If he drinks that, he dies. The shout ripped across Laboratory Ring 7 so suddenly that every conversation stopped at once. Dozens of alien researchers turned toward the human visitor just as Ryan Walker twisted the cap off a plain plastic water bottle he had bought from the station vending machine less than 5 minutes earlier. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to absolute horror. One technician stumbled backwards so fast that a tray of diagnostic chips clattered across the polished floor. Another slammed an emergency containment switch with a trembling hand. Bright amber warning lights flooded the ceiling as an automated voice echoed through the research complex. Hazardous chemical exposure protocol initiated. Ryan blinked, looked around, then glanced down at the bottle in his hand. Seriously? He asked with a confused laugh. It's just water. Nobody laughed with him. The nearest security officer slowly raised both hands, carefully keeping several feet of distance as though Ryan were carrying an unstable explosive. Sir, the translator said in calm, measured English, please place the container on the floor and step away from it. Ryan frowned. You guys really don't like bottled water around here, huh? The officer did not answer. Every eye remained fixed on the clear liquid shimmering inside the bottle. Ryan had spent almost 6 months working aboard the Concord Research Array, one of the largest scientific stations ever built by the Galactic Cooperative. As a contract systems engineer from Colorado, his job was simple. Repair environmental controls, maintain cooling systems, keep the station running, collect a paycheck, and call his 12-year-old daughter every Sunday night back home. Nobody had ever mentioned that drinking water might trigger what looked suspiciously like a station-wide emergency. He slowly lowered the bottle without taking a sip. Okay, he said, trying to sound cooperative. Did I miss a memo or something? A tall physician wearing silver research robes stepped forward. His translated name badge identified him as Dr. Adrian Brooks, though Ryan knew enough by now to understand that most alien specialists adopted familiar human names to make communication easier. The doctor's normally steady voice carried the slightest crack. Mr. Walker, where did you obtain that substance? Ryan held up the bottle. Vending machine outside Dock C. Same place I always do. Brooks stared at him. You purchased it intentionally? Yeah. Ryan shrugged. I was thirsty. Silence settled over the room. Not awkward silence. The kind that made the air itself feel heavier. Brooks exchanged a look with 2 senior biochemists, neither of whom seemed willing to speak first. Finally, one of them whispered something in her native language before the translator rendered it into English. He admits voluntary consumption. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. Consumption? You mean drinking? Yes. Well, yeah, that's usually how water works. The doctor slowly looked back at Ryan as though trying to decide whether he was witnessing extraordinary courage or complete insanity. Mr. Walker, he said carefully, approximately how often do humans expose themselves to this chemical? Ryan answered without thinking. Every day. The room froze. Someone quietly dropped a scanner. Another scientist covered his mouth in disbelief. Brooks swallowed once before asking the question that would change everything. How are you still alive? By Viet. Ryan looked around the silent laboratory, waiting for someone to smile and admit this had all been an elaborate misunderstanding. Nobody did. Dr. Adrian Brooks slowly extended an empty containment tray across the room as though approaching a frightened wild animal. Mr. Walker, I am asking you to place the container here. Please do not open it again until we understand the situation. Ryan carefully set the bottle inside the tray. Doctor, I have to be honest. This is the strangest reaction I have ever seen to bottled water. Brooks nodded to 2 technicians, who immediately sealed the tray beneath a transparent field. One of them quietly whispered, "The concentration appears completely stable." The other answered, "It should not be stable. It should have reacted with the atmosphere by now." Ryan folded his arms. "You all keep talking like that is a barrel of industrial cleaner." Brooks hesitated before replying. "From our perspective, it is considerably more dangerous than that." Ryan let out a short laugh, but it faded as he realized nobody else found the statement amusing. The doctor motioned toward a nearby examination room. "Would you be willing to answer a few questions?" "Sure," Ryan said, "as long as somebody tells me what is going on." They entered a bright medical suite overlooking the enormous research bay. The room felt surprisingly familiar, with white walls, soft lighting, and diagnostic equipment that reminded Ryan of hospitals back home, even if most of it floated instead of sitting on wheels. Usually a couple of liters. More if I am working near the cooling systems. Brooks typed several notes into his console, then stopped. Did no one from station orientation explain our hazardous material regulations? Ryan thought back to his first week. Endless safety briefings. Fire suppression. Airlock procedures. Radiation zones. Nobody ever mentioned water. Brooks slowly leaned back. Because no one believed a human would bring it voluntarily into a laboratory. Ryan could not help smiling. Doctor, every human carries water somewhere. Backpack. Lunchbox. Gym bottle. Coffee starts as water. Tea starts as water. Soup starts as water. Brooks stared at him for several long seconds. Coffee. Yes. Tea. Yes. Ryan shrugged. Most soft drinks too. Across the room, a young researcher quietly gasped after hearing the translation. Brooks rubbed his forehead. Our records described humanity as carbon-based. They omitted this detail. This detail, Ryan repeated. Doctor, without water there would not be any humans. Brooks looked up so quickly that his chair emitted a soft mechanical chirp. Explain. Ryan smiled politely, assuming he was speaking to highly educated people who had somehow missed the basics. A healthy adult body is mostly water. Blood depends on it. Cells depend on it. Your brain needs it. Your muscles need it. You lose too much, you get dehydrated. Keep losing it, and eventually your organs stop working. The translator finished speaking. No one in the room moved. Brooks slowly turned toward the observation window where nearly 30 scientists had gathered outside, listening through the glass. Their expressions ranged from disbelief to quiet panic. One elderly biochemist whispered, "Their entire biology is built around the solvent." Another answered, almost under his breath, "No civilization should have evolved under those conditions." Ryan looked from one face to another, finally realizing this was not confusion over a laboratory rule. These people genuinely believed humanity existed because it had somehow accomplished the impossible. By Viet, Ryan had repaired fusion coolant pumps, rebuilt pressure regulators, and crawled through maintenance shafts barely wide enough for his shoulders. But nothing in his career had prepared him for 30 of the smartest scientists in the galaxy staring at him as though he had casually admitted to breathing fire. Dr. Adrian Brooks finally broke the silence. "Mr. Walker, with your permission, we would like to perform a completely non-invasive metabolic scan." Ryan shrugged. "As long as you are not charging me for it." A few of the younger researchers looked confused. Brooks quietly asked, "Was that humor?" Ryan smiled. "That was definitely humor." The doctor nodded slowly. "Remarkable." Within minutes, Ryan found himself standing on a circular platform surrounded by floating sensors. Soft blue beams swept across his body from head to toe, while dozens of displays filled with data faster than anyone could read it. Brooks remained unusually quiet. Every few seconds another alert appeared across the screens. Intracellular water concentration. Normal. Blood plasma composition. Normal. Brain hydration levels. Normal. Tissue saturation. Normal. One scientist whispered, "The instrument must be malfunctioning." Another immediately ran a calibration check. "The scanner is operating within 100% accuracy." Ryan watched them work. "Doctor, can I ask a question?" Brooks never looked away from the displays. "Please. If water is so dangerous to your people, what do you drink?" Several researchers exchanged uncertain glances before Brooks answered. "Mineral suspension solutions. Organic silicon fluids. Depending on the species, ammonia derivatives or fluorocarbon nutrient compounds." Ryan slowly nodded. "So no lakes?" "No. No rivers." "Certainly not." "Rain?" Brooks frowned. "Liquid atmospheric precipitation containing that chemical would be considered an extinction-level environmental event." Ryan could not stop himself from laughing. It was not disrespectful. It was simply the reaction of someone hearing the exact opposite of everything he had known since childhood. Back home, kids jump into puddles after it rains. The translator repeated the sentence. Nobody spoke. Ryan continued, trying to help them understand. "Families go fishing on weekends. People own boats. We swim in lakes every summer. My daughter loves the ocean. Every year we drive to Florida so she can spend a week at the beach." A researcher near the back slowly sat down as though her legs had suddenly become too weak to hold her. Another quietly asked, "Entire families willingly enter open reservoirs of the substance?" Ryan chuckled. "Usually because it is fun." Brooks finally looked directly at him. "Mr. Walker, approximately what percentage of your homeworld is covered by water?" Ryan answered without hesitation. "Around 71%. The room fell silent once again. Brooks turned toward the massive star map mounted on the laboratory wall. Earth rotated peacefully above the display, covered in brilliant blue oceans that suddenly looked very different through alien eyes. One junior scientist nervously whispered, "Their civilization developed on a world where the dominant environmental feature is the chemical." Another replied even more quietly, "Not despite it. Because of it." Ryan followed their eyes to the holographic Earth and felt an unexpected wave of homesickness. He thought about hiking beside mountain streams with his father, teaching his daughter how to skip rocks across a lake, and drinking cold water straight from a cooler after mowing the lawn on a hot Colorado afternoon. None of those memories had ever seemed extraordinary before today. Brooks slowly exhaled. "Mr. Walker, I believe we have spent centuries asking the wrong question." Ryan tilted his head. "Which question?" The doctor looked back at the scan results covering every screen in the laboratory. "We kept asking how humans survive contact with water. We should have been asking what kind of world could possibly create a species that needs it to live." By Viet, the laboratory no longer felt like a research facility. It felt like the center of the galaxy's biggest scientific mystery. Word spread far beyond Laboratory Ring 7, and within an hour specialists from biology, planetary science, environmental chemistry, and evolutionary history had filled every observation deck overlooking Ryan's examination room. None of them came to study a dangerous weapon. They came to study an ordinary maintenance engineer who had started his morning expecting to replace a faulty coolant sensor. Ryan sat comfortably with a paper cup of coffee resting beside him while Dr. Adrian Brooks stood before a wall-sized display of Earth. The image slowly rotated in silence, brilliant blue oceans wrapping around green and brown continents. Brooks pointed toward the oceans. "You are telling us this is not an isolated chemical storage site." Ryan shook his head. "No, doctor. That is just home." Brooks enlarged the image until the Pacific Ocean filled the display. "This region alone contains enough of the substance to sterilize thousands of inhabited systems." Ryan smiled politely. "It also has some pretty amazing surfing." The translator repeated the sentence exactly as spoken. Several researchers exchanged bewildered looks. One quietly asked another, "What is surfing?" Ryan overheard the question and laughed. "People ride waves for fun." The room became even quieter than before. Brooks slowly pressed 2 fingers against the edge of the console as though grounding himself. "Your people voluntarily enter moving concentrations of this chemical for recreation." "Sure," Ryan answered. "Kids learn when they are little. Parents teach them. Summer vacations, swimming lessons, fishing trips. Nothing unusual about it." A planetary ecologist stepped closer to the display. "Dr. Brooks, I have finished reviewing Earth's environmental archives." Brooks nodded. "Proceed." Average annual rainfall across inhabited regions is measured in dozens of inches. Some locations receive well over 100 inches each year. Ryan noticed several scientists instinctively take one small step backward from the holographic Earth, as if the image itself had become unsettling. Brooks looked at Ryan again. "During these storms, your citizens remain outdoors." Ryan shrugged. Sometimes. Sometimes we complain about getting wet. Sometimes we forget an umbrella. Life goes on." A young researcher blinked several times. "Umbrella?" Ryan smiled. "It keeps the rain off your head." The translator spoke the sentence, and somewhere in the observation gallery someone whispered, "They manufacture personal equipment simply because toxic precipitation is inconvenient." Ryan rubbed his forehead, finally realizing how strange everyday Earth sounded through alien ears. "Doctor, I think we are looking at this from completely opposite directions." Brooks folded his hands. "Explain." Ryan leaned forward. "You see water as the dangerous part. We do not think about it at all. We grow crops with it. We cook with it. We wash with it. We celebrate around it. Entire cities are built beside it because life is easier there." Brooks remained silent for several moments before quietly asking, "Then what do humans fear?" Ryan thought about it honestly. running out of clean water. That answer struck the room harder than anything he had said all day. The displays still showed perfectly normal human biology, but the conversation had revealed something even more astonishing. Humanity had not merely adapted to a substance every known civilization avoided. Human history, culture, families, economies, and daily life had all been shaped around it since the beginning. Brooks looked once more at the blue world turning slowly above the laboratory floor and spoke so softly that the room almost missed it. We classified Earth as an ordinary developing planet. He paused, never taking his eyes off the oceans. I believe we have misunderstood that world from the very first survey. By Viet. Ryan expected the interviews to end after lunch. Instead, they only became stranger. By mid-afternoon, every major scientific institute connected to Concord Array had requested access to his medical records, environmental history, and even his grocery habits. He sat in the same chair, now holding his third cup of coffee, while Dr. Adrian Brooks reviewed a growing stack of reports. "Mr. Walker," Brooks said, "there is one detail we still cannot reconcile." Ryan smiled. "Only one. That sounds like progress." Brooks almost smiled back before returning to the display. "According to your health records, your physician recommends increasing your daily water intake during periods of physical labor." "That is pretty standard," Ryan replied. "If I spend all day fixing coolant lines or climbing maintenance shafts, I drink more. Summer back home can get pretty hot." Brooks looked genuinely puzzled. "Your doctors encourage greater exposure to the substance." "Of course." Ryan shrugged. "If you get dehydrated, you feel awful." The doctor turned to the assembled researchers. "Please begin comparative metabolic modeling." Within seconds, dozens of simulations appeared across the room. They adjusted temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, and hydration levels, searching for some hidden explanation. Every model reached the same conclusion. Water was not merely tolerated by humans. It was required at every stage of their biology. A senior evolutionary biologist finally broke the silence. "Dr. Brooks, I believe we have focused on the wrong variable." Brooks looked up. "Continue." "We assumed humans evolved despite living beside this chemical. The evidence suggests they evolved because of it." Ryan listened quietly as scientists debated ideas that had never crossed his mind. To him, water was something you filled your bottle with before leaving the house. Something you used to make pasta, wash your truck, or water the lawn. He remembered helping his daughter build sandcastles along the Florida coast while waves rolled over their feet. Those memories suddenly sounded unbelievable to everyone else in the room. Brooks noticed Ryan smiling. "May I ask what you were thinking about?" Ryan leaned back. "My daughter. Is she also exposed daily?" Ryan laughed softly. "Doctor, she practically lives in the neighborhood swimming pool every summer. I have to remind her to come inside for dinner." Several researchers immediately began typing notes. One quietly asked, "Children voluntarily remain immersed for extended periods?" Ryan nodded. "Sometimes for hours." Another scientist looked at the Earth display again. "Generational adaptation beginning in early childhood." Ryan chuckled. "No, beginning at birth." Brooks slowly raised an eyebrow. "Birth?" Ryan nodded without realizing the weight of his words. "The first thing doctors check after a baby is born is whether everything looks healthy. Babies are surrounded by fluid before they are born. That is completely normal." Every conversation in the laboratory stopped at once. Brooks stared at him, searching his face for any sign that this might be another joke. There was none. The doctor slowly turned toward the medical display, then toward the rotating image of Earth, and finally back to Ryan. "Mr. Walker," he said quietly, "are you telling us that human life begins inside an environment containing the very substance we classified as universally lethal?" Ryan simply nodded. "That is how every one of us starts." No alarms sounded this time. No one panicked. The room became something even quieter. It was the silence of brilliant minds realizing that an entire branch of galactic biology had just been rewritten by an ordinary engineer who had only wanted a cup of coffee and a bottle of water before getting back to work. By sunset, the laboratory had quietly transformed into something no one had planned. It was no longer studying a visiting engineer. It was studying Earth itself. Dr. Adrian Brooks stood before a conference table now surrounded by specialists joining through holographic links from universities, medical academies, and planetary observatories across the cooperative. Ryan recognized none of the institutions, but he recognized the expressions. They were the same look engineers got whenever a machine refused to follow every rule they thought they understood. Brooks motioned toward Ryan. Our guest has agreed to answer additional questions. Ryan smiled. As long as somebody eventually lets me finish my maintenance shift. A few nervous chuckles finally broke the tension. It was the first time all day anyone besides Ryan had laughed. A planetary climatologist appeared on one of the holographic displays. Mr. Walker, our survey probes indicate that your atmosphere continuously recycles water through evaporation, cloud formation, and precipitation. Are those observations accurate? Ryan nodded. That is what we learned in elementary school. The translator repeated the phrase. Several scientists immediately requested copies of human educational materials. Brooks looked surprised. Children study planetary water cycles? Sure, Ryan answered. Usually before middle school. The room grew quiet again. Concepts considered advanced research throughout the galaxy were apparently taught to 8-year-old children on Earth. Another researcher leaned forward. How does your civilization protect itself from accidental contamination during seasonal rainfall? Ryan blinked. We do not. We mow the lawn after it stops raining. Nobody answered. Ryan realized they were waiting for more. Sometimes we complain that our shoes get wet. Sometimes traffic gets slow. Life keeps moving. Brooks slowly folded his hands. Your species treats continuous environmental exposure as an ordinary inconvenience. Pretty much. Ryan reached for the bottle of water that had finally been returned to him after hours of testing. He paused for a second. Should I warn everybody before I take a drink? Several researchers instinctively stepped backward before realizing what they had done. Brooks gave a tired smile. Please proceed. Ryan unscrewed the cap and took a long drink. Every scanner in the room immediately focused on him. His heartbeat remained steady. Body temperature unchanged. Neural activity normal. Blood chemistry unchanged except for expected hydration levels. One scientist whispered, almost to himself, the chemical integrates seamlessly into every biological process. Brooks quietly added, not integrates. Sustains. Ryan tightened the cap and set the bottle on the table. Can I ask all of you something? Brooks nodded. Of course. If water scares everyone this much, what did your first survey teams think when they found Earth? Brooks looked toward the rotating hologram of the blue planet. They assumed your world was hostile beyond practical colonization. The reports concluded that any intelligent species evolving there would almost certainly remain primitive because the dominant environmental compound would prevent complex biological development. Ryan smiled gently. Well, I guess we surprised them. Brooks looked directly at him. Mr. Walker, I believe the survey teams made a far greater mistake than simply underestimating humanity. Ryan tilted his head. Brooks continued, his voice calm but unmistakably humbled. They believed Earth succeeded despite its environment. We are beginning to understand that your planet became extraordinary because of it. Everything we considered impossible was simply normal on your world from the very beginning. By Viet, the following morning Ryan finally thought everything would settle down. Instead, he arrived outside Laboratory Ring 7 to find a line of visiting researchers stretching halfway down the corridor. Some had traveled across multiple star systems overnight after hearing the preliminary findings. Others simply wanted to see the human who casually carried what their civilizations classified as one of the most destructive chemicals ever discovered. Ryan looked at the crowd and sighed. I should have called in sick. Dr. Adrian Brooks smiled for what felt like the first genuine time since they had met. Unfortunately, Mr. Walker, I believe you have become the most important volunteer in modern biology. Ryan laughed. Volunteer? I do not remember signing up. Brooks gestured toward a newly assembled demonstration room. Perhaps not intentionally. Inside, a transparent research chamber had been prepared with dozens of remote sensors. Ryan immediately noticed something missing. There were no living subjects. Every sample on the workbench consisted of artificial cellular tissue grown from laboratory cultures. Brooks noticed Ryan studying the room. Do not worry. We are only testing synthetic biological material. We have no interest in exposing any living being to unnecessary risk. Ryan nodded with visible relief. Good. I was about to say that this was getting way above my pay grade. Brooks picked up a sealed capsule no larger than a vitamin bottle. Inside is an artificial tissue culture engineered to imitate the cellular structure common among nearly 60% of cooperative member species. It has no nervous system and no consciousness. Ryan watched as robotic arms carefully transferred the sample beneath a microscope. Another technician held up a tiny transparent vial. Ryan smiled. "Let me guess." Brooks nodded. "Purified water." The room became completely silent. Every researcher fixed their attention on the monitors. A single automated pipette released one tiny drop onto the synthetic tissue. For several seconds, nothing happened. Ryan quietly whispered, "Maybe it is not so bad after all." Then the scanners began reporting rapid molecular changes. The tissue structure immediately lost stability. Its cells separated from one another, their normal chemical balance collapsing within moments. Bright warning symbols filled every display, not because anything violent had happened, but because every prediction model had failed. The experiment ended almost as quickly as it began. Brooks slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The models were accurate. One biochemist quietly answered, "More accurate than we hoped." Ryan stared at the monitor. "That little drop did all of that?" Brooks nodded. "To our biology, yes." Ryan leaned back in his chair, suddenly understanding why everyone had reacted with such fear the day before. He had spent his entire life assuming water was ordinary because it surrounded every part of human existence. These scientists had spent their entire lives proving exactly the opposite. Brooks looked thoughtfully toward Ryan. "Do you understand what this means?" Ryan nodded slowly. "It means neither of us was wrong. We were simply raised by completely different planets." Brooks smiled. "Exactly." He turned toward the assembled researchers. "Humanity does not possess unusual resistance to a universal poison. Humanity evolved alongside a chemical that shaped every aspect of their biology while shaping none of ours. We are not witnessing an exception to science. We are witnessing science that developed along an entirely different path." For the first time since Ryan had walked into the laboratory carrying nothing more dangerous than a bottle of water, the room was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with something much rarer. Genuine curiosity. By Viet, 3 days after Ryan accidentally turned the Concorde research array upside down, he finally found a quiet corner overlooking the station gardens and called home. The screen flickered for a second before the smiling face of his 12-year-old daughter, Lily, filled the display. "Dad," she said, "you missed my soccer game." Ryan smiled with genuine relief. "I know, sweetheart. I am sorry. Something unexpected happened at work." "Did you fix it?" she asked. Ryan laughed. "Not exactly. I think I accidentally broke science instead." Lily rolled her eyes the way only a middle school kid could. "That sounds like something you would do." Behind Ryan, several researchers pretending to study nearby plants quietly froze when they realized he was speaking with another human. They had spent days examining laboratory data, but now they were witnessing something none of their instruments could measure. A completely ordinary conversation. "Did you remember to drink enough water?" Lily asked. Ryan instinctively reached for the bottle sitting beside him. "Always." He took a long sip without thinking. The researchers exchanged nervous glances before quickly reminding themselves that they had already watched him do exactly the same thing dozens of times. Nothing unusual happened. Ryan simply smiled and continued talking to his daughter. "How is Grandpa?" "He is good," Lily answered. "He finally fixed the old fishing boat, and he says we are all going to the lake when you get home." Ryan felt a familiar warmth spread across his face. "Tell him I cannot wait." The translator quietly carried every word to the observers standing several yards away. One elderly anthropologist whispered, 3 generations gathering beside an open body of the chemical. Another answered, "Not for survival, for family." Brooks, who had arrived unnoticed, listened without interrupting. Ryan and Lily spent another few minutes talking about school, homework, and whether their golden retriever had finally stopped stealing socks from the laundry basket. It sounded wonderfully ordinary. When the call ended, Ryan sat quietly for a moment before noticing Brooks standing nearby. "Sorry," Ryan said. "Family comes first." Brooks slowly nodded. "I believe we are only beginning to understand that." They walked together toward the observation deck, where Earth floated in the distance on a massive astronomical display. Brooks folded his hands behind his back. "Mr. Walker, when we first met, many of us believed humanity represented an impossible biological anomaly. Ryan smiled. And now? Brooks looked at the image of Earth. Now I believe humanity represents something much more important. Proof that life is shaped by its environment in ways we never imagined. Ryan looked at the same blue world. Back home, nobody wakes up wondering whether water is dangerous. They worry about paying the mortgage, getting their kids to school on time, remembering birthdays, and hoping it does not rain during a barbecue. Brooks quietly laughed. Those concerns sound wonderfully uncomplicated. Ryan shrugged. That is life. The doctor nodded slowly. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson your species has given us. The most extraordinary discoveries often hide inside the routines people stop noticing. Around them, the station continued operating as always, but something fundamental had changed. Researchers no longer looked at humans with fear or disbelief. They looked with respect, not because humanity possessed stronger weapons or more advanced technology, but because an ordinary engineer had reminded an entire civilization that the universe could never be fully understood by studying only worlds that looked like their own. By Viet, the official report from Concord Research Array was released 6 weeks later. It stretched across thousands of pages, filled with chemical analysis, biological models, environmental studies, and revised planetary classifications. Scientists celebrated it as one of the most important discoveries in modern history. Ryan never bothered reading it. He was back in Colorado, standing in his backyard on a cool Saturday morning with a garden hose in one hand and his golden retriever chasing streams of water across the grass. Lily laughed so hard she could barely stay on her feet. Dad, he thinks he can catch every drop. Ryan smiled. He has been trying for years. Half a galaxy away, university students watched recordings of that simple afternoon as part of their first course on comparative biology. They did not study the hose because it was advanced technology. They studied it because generations of brilliant scientists had overlooked the most obvious truth imaginable. Every civilization had assumed life elsewhere would follow familiar rules. Humanity had quietly proven otherwise. Dr. Adrian Brooks often ended his lectures with the same photograph. It was not a laboratory. It was not a microscope. It was not even Ryan standing beside complicated equipment. It was a picture of Earth taken from orbit, a brilliant blue world wrapped in clouds. Brooks would pause before speaking. We once believed this planet survived despite its oceans. We now understand those oceans wrote the story of the people who call it home. Students rarely spoke after hearing those words. They simply stared at the image a little longer than before. Months later, Brooks received a small package from Earth. Inside was a handwritten postcard showing a mountain lake at sunrise. On the back, Ryan had written only one sentence. If you ever visit, I will teach you how to skip rocks. Brooks smiled every time he read it. The invitation represented something larger than science. It represented trust. Curiosity had replaced fear. Respect had replaced assumptions. Years passed, and new partnerships formed between Earth and worlds that once considered it impossible. Human engineers shared environmental technology. Alien researchers shared medical breakthroughs. Children on distant planets learned about Earth's water cycle alongside their own planetary histories, not as a warning, but as a reminder that nature has more than one way to create life. Ryan remained exactly who he had always been. He fixed broken equipment, forgot where he left his toolbox, called his daughter every week after she left for college, and still carried a water bottle almost everywhere he went without giving it much thought. People occasionally asked how it felt to change galactic science forever. He always answered the same way. I did not change science. I just showed up thirsty. Perhaps that was the lesson everyone remembered long after the reports were archived. The universe is filled with remarkable discoveries, but many of them do not arrive with explosions or grand speeches. Sometimes they arrive inside ordinary moments that everyone else has stopped noticing. Sometimes the greatest strength of humanity is not that we are extraordinary. It is that we can spend an entire lifetime surrounded by everyday miracles without realizing they look impossible to someone seeing them for the very first time.